city down there. And so I'll explain that in just a minute. But you see the main road called what's that road called? Right straight down, main road called this main road right here, right in front of me.
Allen Street.
Okay, that's well, don't read the signs. What's the main road in these Roman cities called? They're called the
Cardo.
Cardo. Okay, the heart road, cardiology. Cardiology. When you have something going on with your heart, it's cardiology. So the heart road, the center road. So there would normally be, two main roads, right? There'd be one going this way and then a one going this way. So you can see the one that's going this way, right? If you kind of have to stand up here to see the other one that's going this way. But see this road coming right toward us? Okay, what happened is because this tell was here, we're on the Israelite Canaanite tell. Was that made clear, right? Salah said that this is the Israelite Canaanite spot. That's the Greek Roman spot. So when that cardo came right down the road, because this tell was here, the cardo had to kind of make a turn. You see it? And go out that way. Remember we were walking way back there towards the beginning and Salah said, oh yeah, look at that over there. There's the cardo. Remember out there? So that cardo came here and then had to kind of make a turn around the tell and then go back out because you obviously couldn't move the tell, right? And that's what they did. So Roman, Greek, it came to be called in Greek. By the time the Greeks were here and so on, Old Testament, it was Beit She'an. And then the Greek word was Scythopolis. Scythopolis. Okay? Like Syrian city. That's what that kind of means. So I want to first of all, start with the Old Testament. So let's start up here on the tell with the Old Testament, then we'll work our way down into the Greek Roman city. So some of this we already talked about, right? And was along the way, and Salah was mentioning it. But this is sort of the place where we read about King Saul, as Salah just referred to. King Salah. Just referred to. So I'm not going to retell the whole story of Saul, but just to read that one verse, that we referred to about the death of Saul. That's it. Just read that. Well, a couple of verses, actually. This is in 1 Samuel 31. So this is how the whole book of 1 Samuel ends, right? The whole book of 1 Samuel has been about the rise of Saul to become, well, first of all, the Israelites asking for a king, begging for a king so that we can be like all the other nations. Because what do all the other nations do? They fight wars and they conquer people and they accumulate stuff and wealth. We want to be like that. And God says, well, all right then. Be careful what you wish for. You might just get it. And so God says, okay, go ahead, Samuel, anoint the first king Saul. Let's see how that goes. I think sometimes you have to get the bad king first before you can really appreciate the good king. You have to have winter first before you love spring. You know what I mean? So you have to kind of get Saul first before you appreciate a David. So they get the first king, they get Saul, and he's very popular because he is a military man. He is tall, he is handsome, he is Charlton Heston, he is Brad Pitt, he is, I don't know, who else? I don't know. He's all that, right? And he's popular and he's good and he follows God for about 5 minutes. And then he gets headstrong. And he wants to be like all the other nations and all the other kings. And you can read the whole story in 1 Samuel. I'm not going to read all that. Read it. You can see how Saul and Samuel kind of confronts him. What are you doing? You're just not being the king that God wants you to. And Saul says, well, who cares? I'm the king. Shut up. And so finally Samuel announces to Saul, well then, you're not going to be the king anymore. Because, God, you're not doing what God wants. And then that whole thing. And then we have this war with the Philistines. 1 Samuel, verse 31. Verse 8.
Okay.
The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. Right over here to the west. To the west, right over there, Mount Gilboa, right there. Okay? They found the 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, stripped off his armor. They sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. We won. The king is dead. The king of Israel, Saul, we killed him. Verse 10, they put his armor in the temple of the Asherahs and fastened his body to the wall of Beit Sha'an. So what is this about? What are they doing to Saul? What are the Philistines doing to Saul? Remember, Saul talked about, why they crucified Jesus. This is humiliation, right? Cut off his head, strip him of his armor, bring his body over here and hang it on the wall as a symbol of, don't you mess with the Philistines. This is what happens to people who mess with us. And that's what happened to King Saul. When the people of Jabesh Gilead, that way to the east, Jabesh Gilead, heard about it, of what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men journeyed through the night to Beit Sha'an. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Beit Sha'an and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. Then they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. Interesting story, isn't it? Brutal story, a war story, but then we see what sort of is the conclusion of King Saul's life. And if you continue reading into 2 Samuel, the very first chapter of 2 Samuel is David's lament, a poem of lament, a funeral poem, or dirge, if you will, over the death of Saul. So David first, the whole 1 Samuel, David, Saul pursuing David to kill him. If I were David and Saul were dead and hung on the wall of Beit Sha'an, what might you say? My turn, man. It's my turn. But David honors King Saul. He mourns over him, and then of course, David rises to the throne. Okay? So that's kind of Old Testament Beit Sha'an. So let's get to the Decapolis part, because that's what we're doing here in this side of the, in this area. So Evan already told you about the feeding of the 4,000. Where'd that happen? In the Decapolis, right here. Jesus came here, and just as he's fed 5,000 in the red circle, he fed 4,000 in the blue circle. And then the 12 baskets in the 7, you heard about that, right? And Jesus is just as concerned about these people as he is about the people in the red circle. In fact, I don't want to say this, but who are the people that actually believed and followed him? These ones. The Gerasene demoniac. Poor people. Demon-possessed people. Sick people. Desperate people. The Torah people in the red circle ended up really not, right? So Jesus came here and was concerned about them. So, how did this place get here as a Roman city? Well, you heard on the bus, Pompey, the Roman general, came and he made this part of the Decapolis in 63 BC. So 63 BC, the Romans are coming into this area, and he makes this one of the Decapolis cities. A league of 10 cities. And what was the idea behind putting 10 Decapolis Roman cities here in this land? What was the purpose? What were the Romans trying to do? Okay, power, right, Kim? Power, to display their power. But even more than that,
Control.
Okay, control. And not just control of people, right? But control of their minds, their hearts, their attitudes, their desires, their worldview. What Rome is really doing is importing worldview. Worldview is everything, right? Worldview is how you look at the world. It's your assumptions about the world. It's what you believe about stuff. It's what you believe about truth and reality and values and morals and education and truth. And it's just how you get all your basic ideas and beliefs, right? And so the Romans had their worldview, and they wanted to import that here so that it would get spread around this area, because this was a valuable part of the Roman Empire. I mean, we're here, it maybe doesn't look like anything, but the Dead Sea and the salt, the fish at the Sea of Galilee, the agriculture, this was a prosperous place, and the Roman Empire wanted to control it militarily, but also in worldview, right? And that's what's going on here. Now, to be honest with you, most of the ruins that you're seeing down there are actually from the 200s AD, 300s AD, 400s AD. So, to be honest, you're looking at sort of 200 years after the first century. However, the ruins of the city in Jesus' time were just as magnificent as this. Just get an idea of what it was. But just to be honest, those are more Byzantine ruins down there. So the idea was to spread Greek, Roman worldview. We call that, there's a name for that, sort of the Greekization of the world. Anybody got it? The name that we call sort of the spreading of Greek, and what we call the Greek spreading of Hellenism or Hellenization, right? So it's about Hellenism. So there's a guy named Pythagoras, 400 BC, Pythagoras, and this is I think would characterize that Greek Hellenistic worldview maybe to a T. Said this, that man or humans are the measure of all things, what is seen and what is unseen. Humans are the center of all things. Everything that you can see, everything that you cannot see. It's human-centered worldview. Does that make sense? And that's what they were doing. That's kind of where it all got started. In other words, to say, we are God. We humans are God. We are all there is. Humans are the center and source of all truth. The human mind is the beginning and the end of all things. It's the supremacy of human beings and human accomplishment. I mean, this is really the Greek worldview, the Roman worldview, and all that. The gods are actually becoming less and less important in this time period. There's sort of a fading of that in the first century and so on, the Greek and the Roman god. They still had them, and the gods kind of kept track of the calendar and the seasons and the festivals and the drinking. They were good for that. But really, they were becoming less and less important. And what was becoming more and more important? Humans. And their achievements and their education and their minds and all of that. Now, let me just describe a little bit of the Greek life and the Roman life and what was part of these cities. First of all would be the theater. You see the theater straight across? You can see it's been reconstructed at the bottom, and then you can see the original, how they found it, sort of more up there at the top. What was the theater for? What was the purpose of the theater? What was that supposed to do?
Express entertainment.
Okay, entertainment. It was entertainment, for sure, right? What else was the theater, the purpose of it? What was it there for?
Expressing worldview.
Okay. Teaching, communicating worldview. To say, this is what Greek life looks like. This is what Roman life looks like. This is how you should live. They would dramatize what life should be in the theater, and then basically to say, go out and you guys do that now. You live that way. And the back wall would kind of be, the back walls would kind of be open so that as you're sitting in the theater, you could observe life in the city. And you're looking at life in the city, and you're watching the play on the stage, and you're going, oh, I'm supposed to do that, and I'm supposed to live like that, and I'm going to go repeat that in my life. So the theater seated about 7,000 people. That one did. By the way, which is interesting, this is the largest archaeological dig in the whole country. So the very first time I came here, it was actually over 30 years ago when I came here. And when I came to Beit Shan over 30 years ago, this was all covered with dirt. You couldn't see a thing. In fact, we sat on like the top of that theater, and they told us, we think there's a theater here, but we don't know.
That's so cool.
And so we were just kind of sitting on the edge of it going, And then over the last 30 years, this all has been dug out and exposed. So you're looking at something actually fairly recent that's been going on. So listen, if you were a Jew or a Christian, would you go to the theater? No. Absolutely not. Because the theater was a place to tell stories and to communicate worldview. It was a place of drinking and sex. I mean, it was debauchery at the theater, dedicated to Dionysius. Who's Dionysius? The goddess of
fertility and
drinking and wine and intoxication and partying and theater. People, we're all adults here. People in the crowd would have sex with each other during the performance because the plays themselves were pornographic. And people would come here and watch the pornography going on the stage, and then they would repeat it and mimic it sitting. and then you were to go out and live this way. This is the way we live. We exalt materialism and human accomplishment and sexuality and perversion and all of that stuff. Compare that to the synagogue in the red circle in Capernaum and the one that we're going to go to in Gamla tomorrow. What did the synagogue look like? Well, I know we haven't been to Gamla yet. I go to Gamla first before I'm here, but you sat in a circle in a round like this, facing each other, kind of all the benches all around. What were the values of the synagogue?
Torah at the center.
Torah at the center, the Word of God. The rabbi said 2 + 2 = 4 because God made it that way. And that's what we'll teach our children. And the Romans and the Greeks had other ideas and so on like that. How is truth communicated in the synagogue? What is truth? How is truth communicated?
Reading of the Word of God.
Yeah, truth comes from God, right? Inspired word from the mouth of God, and this is how we're supposed to live. This is what we're supposed to mimic and reduplicate. The stage, the actors were like gods. Everyone in the audience had an unobstructed view of the stage, right? You're sitting there and you have an unobstructed view of the stage. The experience was about the individual member. So, I mean, the value, the ideal in Roman Greek ideas was, it wasn't so much social and communal in character, it was about the elevation of the individual, right? And so everybody had an unobstructed view, and you're experiencing this as an individual person. It's all about me. Architecture communicates worldview. Architecture communicates worldview. Architecture, how does the architecture of the theater communicate worldview? As opposed to the synagogue.
You're not seeing other people, you're just seeing the stage.
You're not seeing the other people around you.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if you're just seeing the stage, you're not seeing anybody else in the audience. It's you having an individual experience looking at the stage, right? And what's going on the stage. That's good. Right? Okay, just think about our Western churches for a minute. What worldview does the architecture of most of our churches communicate? Just think about the architecture of your church and what happens at your church. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's a different way. Western or, the synagogue Eastern. What worldview does the architecture of our churches communicate? How's your church set up? How's your church set up?
Inward focus in rows.
Okay, like a theater. Isn't your church set up like a theater? I mean, maybe not an amphitheater, although some churches are, right? But set up in rows, right? Everybody sits in their, at least at my church, apparently everybody has their own name on their own seat. I did not know that, but apparently they do. And they sit in their seat because we want to give ourselves completely to God in humble service and worship of Him, and we want to do it in our seats. It's always a little funny. Don't tell this to anybody. Just, it's in the vault. But I just, architect, and then of course we're all looking forward. Everyone is looking forward at the stage. At one person standing up there communicating. It's very Greek, isn't it? It's very Western. It's very theater-like. Almost to the point sometimes of entertainment. Let's watch what's going on. Is the music cool? Is the pastor, does he have a good sermon? Is he entertaining? Oh, I felt good. I'm going to go home now, and I just had a really cool individual experience at church, and now I'm going to go home, and I feel good about me and Jesus, me and Jesus. It's just me and Jesus. See what I mean? Architecture communicates worldview. And then look at the synagogue. They all sit around looking at each other, seeing each other's faces, hearing from each other, in community. I mean, I don't want to go into Jeff's thing in ministry, and Jeff has an awesome ministry called The Foundry, and it's just awesome. And it's ministry training, and it's very, I don't know if you plan it, but Eastern.
Yeah.
It's very communal.
Very communal.
It's very Eastern, It's just sitting in a circle. It's listening to each other, hearing the voice of God through one another, listening to the truth of God. And the idea is not an individual experience that you can go and do your thing. You know what I mean? And so this is very, very sort of Western what we're looking at. So that's a theater. That's a theater. I could say more, but I don't want to keep going on about that. And then there's the arena, the palestra. The palestra. Some of you old folks remember that in Philadelphia, where Dr. J played, the arena was called the palestra. It's a sports arena, right? So the Greeks gave birth to the Olympics. You know, there were the Olympic Games, there were the Isthmian Games, there were the Pythian Games, there were all these athletic competitions and art competitions and music competitions. It was for entertainment, but Hellenism gave birth to winners and losers. And exalting the human body and the athleticism of the human body and the muscular shape of the human body and the form of the body. You go all over in Greece. If you go to Greece, well, don't take this the wrong way, but my wife called it the Penis Museum. But,
First Olympics, it was only men.
yeah,
And they were all naked.
and they ran naked and they ran nude.
Even pedestrians were naked.
Yeah. And you go and you see all the Greek statues of men, and they're standing there, and and it's just, you look at and you observe and worship the human body. It's about me and athleticism and winning at all costs. Then there was something called the gymnasium. It comes from the Greek word gumnos. Gumnos. Anybody know what gumnos means in Greek? Gumnos? Nakedness. Nakedness. The gumnos, or the gymnasium, was a place of nakedness. Nudity was the ultimate expression of beauty. Now, the gymnasium was a place to work out. We call our high schools have gymnasiums and colleges, and it's an athletic place. And it was a place to work out and do physical training. But more than that, it was a place of what? The gymnasium, the gymnos. You would train naked, and you would train out there, with lifting or wrestling or something, right? And then you would do what?
Sex.
Well, maybe.
Take a bath.
That's the track. Like that's where my mind's at right
I
now.
know. It's okay. But it was a place, the gymnasium, everybody, was a school. It was a place of education. It's where you would go and you would study literature and art and Greek philosophy and mathematics and geometry, right? And all the stuff that we hated in school. I did geometry, math, but no, some people liked it. But yeah, you would study math, science, philosophy, just the Greek model of education. Hellenism is superior. I mean, you go back to Plato and the introduction, the beginning of what was called the academy, right? The academy and Plato and, education. And that the goal of education was the enlightened mind and self-fulfillment. And this is the Greek model, right? Theater, arena, gymnasium. And then there's are you following me? Theater, arena, gymnasium, and then the agora. So you're looking at the street here, and the agora would be right out here in the center, and there would be shops all along here. The agora, again, is what? That's the marketplace. It's the exchange of goods and ideas and money, and oh, by the way, the exchange of worldview. All these buildings glorify the excess of pleasure. Is anything neutral in the marketplace? We think it is, right? We think, I'm just going to the mall. I'm just going to the mall. It's just neutral. It's nothing. Is anything neutral? No, of course not. It's communicating, buy this, put this in your hair, brush your teeth with this, wear these clothes. You see what I mean? It's communication of worldview. There was a very interesting, wonderful little book written some years ago. Maybe, Jeff, you can tell me the year that Jamie Smith wrote his book, Desiring the Kingdom. I forget, maybe 2010, something like that. You ought to pick it up, Desiring the Kingdom by a Calvin University professor named Jamie Smith. And it's just how he says we usually think about the way we communicate truth and worldview is through ideas and doctrine, right? We have Heidelberg catechisms, and we have confessions, and we have, we communicate it intellectually with the right answers to the right questions. And that really worldview is more communicated through your heart and not your mind, through the things that we desire and long for. And that's the premise and thesis of his book. And I think that's exactly what was going on down here.
What was his first name again?
Jamie, so Jamie, Jamie Smith. Jamie Smith is the name, Desiring the Kingdom, and just talks about how worldview gets communicated, not so much through ideas, but through your heart and what we desire. And it's at the mall. So when you go to the mall, you think it's harmless. And the idea is it's not. Wear these clothes and so on. Are you with me? And that's what he was doing. So let me ask you this. The theater, the arena, the gymnasium, the education method, the agora, the excess, the pleasure, the self-fulfillment, the individualism, the sexual perversion. Sound like a culture you're familiar with?
Nothing's changed.
Yeah. It's a culture that we're familiar with, isn't
Nothing
it?
new under the sun.
Yeah. And so I think in our culture, we need to be just aware. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong what we do in church. I'm not saying we should, although, have anybody been into the chapel at Calvin University?
Yes.
How's it set up? In the round, like a synagogue. They did it on purpose. Isn't that interesting? They set it up in the round like that. That's pretty cool.
Sort of cornerstone.
We just need to be aware. Nothing is neutral. Not the marketplace, not the education system, not the agora, not the athletics. We glorify athleticism in our culture. LeBron James is the king. That's his name. In fact, a few weeks ago, he actually crowned himself king in a game. He's like, I'm the king.
Yeah, he did that.
Yeah, he did. Yes, he did. He put the crown on his own head.
Makes you want to puke.
And it's very Western. I know. So, I know we just got to be aware, but let me just finish with this. If you think about our education system, I mean, not everything, obviously, our education system is bad. I mean, it's not. It's not. But much of it collides with biblical worldview. Compare the gymnasium to Beit Sefer. Remember the Beit Sefer that we talked about in class? Remember the education system with the children, then the middle school, then the rabbis and the Talmidim? Just compare, right? This is about self-fulfillment, individualism, enlightenment. And the Beit Sefer is about community and following the rabbi and mimicking the rabbi and reproducing the character of God. Does that make sense? And that's what they were doing. Maybe this question, we could talk for a long time. Is Kuiper College like the gymnasium or the Beit Sefer? Is Kuiper College like the gymnasium or the Beit Sefer? What would you say, students? What are we doing? What are we doing? I'm just asking. I don't know the answer. Maybe. Are we like the gymnasium or the Beit Sefer? How do we sit in class? How's the classroom organized? Huh? Like a theater. Right? And then somebody gets up in front, and what do they usually do for an hour and 20 minutes? They lecture and talk. Now, Aristotle liked to do that. Plato was more about the dialectic and the arguments and going back and forth. Aristotle just liked to hold forth and do lectures. I think I got that right, John. Okay. Not the philosopher guy, but yeah. I think maybe we're a little bit of both, aren't we? We're a little bit of both. I mean, we are in an education system in a Western country, and we offer degrees, and we have pieces of paper, and we do stuff like that, and very much it's sometimes like the theater, and very much like this Western style of education. On the other hand, we're a Bible college, right? And we do obviously acknowledge truth coming from God and Scripture, and we do describe ourselves as a learning community, right? And ministry training. So I think, I don't want to be critical, and that's not the idea. We shouldn't do that. But just be observant of what's going on. There's nothing neutral. And it's all about worldview and communication of a way of life. And I think the more we're aware of it, the more that we can, I think, lean into a biblical worldview and Christian worldview. And then that we can go out and obviously live in a way that is to many degrees countercultural and against the culture in which we live, and confront it sometimes, right? Transform it sometimes. But just be aware of where we are. Does that make sense? All right, questions or comments? I mean, that's enough. You got the idea, right? The Kappas. Questions, comments, anything?
Well, we experienced that to a degree after our